Hey, Awaken Church. This is Andrew again, and I'm here with Neal. And we're really excited to just bring you another one of our stories. And one of the things with this pandemic has been, how do we really process hard things, difficult things? How do we even grieve? And there are many people who are grieving many different things right now. High school seniors are grieving the fact that they're not going to have graduation or pictures. Sometimes people are grieving things that are coming up in the past, and sometimes people just aren't really sure what they're grieving. They're just kind of sad. You know, their plans have been thwarted, and it's at times like these that we do need help to process our emotions and to grieve, and it's also times like these where sometimes even being socially distant and more lonely can cause us to really struggle more with grief as well. And one of the things that I wanted to have is just a faithful man in our church share his story of grief and loss, and even how he's doing in this time. And so, Neal, I'd just love to ask you to tell and share your story, just you and Rachel, and to tell us the good and the bad and how you're doing in this time.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and thanks everybody for joining us, and hopefully you were inspired by this and we get something good out of this. So the story of me and Rachel kind of started in Andrew's house. Because I walked in there on the 2nd of February, about 4 years ago, and there was Rachel. And so from there, it quickly progressed to us just kind of like looking at each other across the room to getting into a relationship. We actually got engaged pretty quickly and got married in the 10th of February in 2017. On the 11th of April, and if you remember, that's like just a couple of days ago, 3 years ago, so 2 months, 1 day after our wedding, she was in a car accident one morning on her way to work, and she was killed in the car accident. So, and obviously that is a very difficult thing because 2 months. I mean, that's like nothing. Anyway, so where do you go from there? And it's difficult. I mean, I was lucky enough that I had time to have take extended time off and actually not be at work, and just took a lot of time to like process things like that. And when I was getting ready to go back to work, I broke my ankle, so that didn't really help that much either. But now I'm back at work, and life is going on. Now, unfortunately, through all of this, and this is something that people that have gone through grief, the people that have lost loved ones, will all tell you that grief is not something that you get over. Grief is something that you learn to live with. And so I've learned to live with it, and people will tell you that the first year is the toughest, and some people will say that the second year is the toughest. And I'll say that the first year is tough in certain respects, the second year is tough in different respects. And then the third year comes around and you don't know what to expect. And there's times even in the third year that it's been really, really tough, and so forth. But there was good things about Rachel. Rachel was a wonderful woman of God. She was somebody that was very generous. She really loved church. She loved kids, and she was very involved with a lot of things in the church. Our kitchen build-out, she was, if I'm not mistaken, was the largest single contributor of funds for that kitchen build-out. She was very involved with Jolt and really helped out a lot there. When she left to go to our Heavenly Father, she was missed by a lot of people, and she was really there. Now, the bad thing about that is especially in this time right now, is for a lot of us, and I think that some of our college students might not be in the situation where they're around family. They might be by themselves. So I totally understand what that feels like, because I know what that feels like. But yeah, during this time, it's like you just have much more of a feeling of isolation, because you are alone. You have nobody that you can share your thoughts with. You have nobody that you can speak to. You have nobody that you can, like if you read something in the Bible and you want to just bounce that off somebody. It's difficult to do.
Yeah.
But you can reach out to people, but you can't do that if you do quiet time at 12 o'clock at night, for instance. I don't think Andrew's going to love it when I send him a message like, hey, can you answer this question?
I might not love it, but I'll answer it. So
so it's that. It's missing the conversation. It's the miss.
Yeah.
I really miss the generosity that she had, and like she had a love for life. That was like really apparent. Anybody that met her was, really loved her from the beginning, basically. And she lived life to the fullest. But yeah, and then of course, as husband and wife, there's more intimate things that you miss as well, and especially when you're not around other people, that becomes a little bit more apparent too. So, and that's sometimes tough. You make it through. So you make it through.
Yeah, thank you, Neal, just for sharing kind of a glimpse of who Rachel was and even some of the challenges. And I know, right, you kind of mentioned waves of grief and being isolated and distance. You shared how you've managed some things. Any thoughts or helpful advice to people who might be struggling with grief as well in this season? What have you learned? What can you pass on?
So I think one of the biggest things is that when you're going through grief, you really do feel very isolated. So I think the 2 years that I've gone through has maybe helped me to prepare a little bit better than other people. And I think it's just because there comes a certain time that a lot of people have moved on with their lives, and you're still sitting with the grief, and you still have to deal with it. And they don't realize it. And you get to the point that you just say, if somebody says, how are you doing? You just go, I'm fine. Because wanting to explain that all again, because people think that, it's been a year or 2 years, you should be fine. Well, you might be fine that day, but the next day you might not be. A lot of it is like the anticipation of days is sometimes very difficult. We all look at it now and we anticipate the day that we could just go back to being normal. But that day is, we don't know when that's going to be. And I think that's kind of where grief is kind of similar, because we don't know when that day is going to come that we really feel like we could just move on. And I know that grief is a very personal journey. So what's true for me is not going to be true for anybody else. Each person that goes through grief is a very singular path, and what you do and how you go through it is very unique to each individual. And maybe that's something that we need to take out there, is like, we need to understand that God has created us each as individuals, and the way that there's some truth in what we can do, stay active, do things, try to do wholesome things instead of non-wholesome things during this time. But for each one of us, we were going to experience it differently, but that's the uniqueness of our Creator that made us each unique, because we each play a very unique part in His kingdom. Yeah. So, and maybe one of the things that I'll do is to kind of like let's talk about that. So really, like, for me, the things that put me and took me through my grief journey is, first of all, faith, and it's just the faith to know that God is with you. Even when it didn't feel like it, it's just to know that yes, God still has you, even though you still question, and I still question sometimes, like, why, and things like that. It's like, it's the faith. You need to have that faith, but you also need to have that hope. And that hope is a strange thing, but we do have a hope for something better. And even if that hope, sometimes our hopes on earth will never be fulfilled, but our hopes on heaven is always a surety. And it's sometimes difficult to just take us out of that mindset to look forward to what that hope would be. But we do have to do that, and that's another thing that'll help us. And then we realize that our strength comes from God. So I've actually shared this verse before, and I'm going to share it again. It's a little passage, actually. And if you're wondering, this is actually Rachel's Bible. So that's cool. So it's a part that she actually highlighted. And actually, I spoke about this in the memorial service for her. But I'm going to repeat this verse, or these couple of verses. In Psalm 25, starting in verse 4, and we'll go through to verse 10. And it says, "Show me the right path, O Lord. Point out the road for me to follow. Lead me by your truth and teach me, for you are the God who saves me. All day long, I put my hope in you. Remember, O Lord, your compassion. Remember, O Lord, your compassion and unfailing love, which you have shown from long ages past. Do not remember the rebellious sins of my youth. Remember me in the light of your unfailing love, for you are merciful, O Lord. The Lord is good and does what is right. He shows the proper path to those who go astray. He leads the humble in doing right, teaching them his way. The Lord leads with unfailing love and faithfulness all who keeps his covenant and obey his demands. And I think that's that's a couple of verses that we can really grasp onto in this time, that we're just so unsure about what's happening, where is life going to take us. And so I hope that brings some hope and courage for people through this time where we just don't know. We need to know, and that just says, we get our faith, we get our hope and our strength. It all comes from God. And honestly, a lot of people during this journey just said, it's like, Neal, how can you do this? How can you be so strong? And I'm like, I'm not strong. It's not me. It's God that lives in me. He's the only person that's giving me the strength to go through this. And
Yeah, this is really good, Neal. So in our brief time remaining, Rachel was a huge part of our church. We mentioned she served the first cup of coffee when we launched our church from kind of a college church to a community church. And what words would you have for us? Again, she was such a big part of our church. So anything that you'd love to share with us as a church as a kind of a closing thought?
So a couple of things, actually. So the first is, she loved coffee, and she actually collected coffee mugs. So I actually brought in a couple of the stranger ones, the cow one, with the udders and everything. She loved art, so there's one with a little bit more art on it, and of course there's coffee on the cup as well. And she was born on Halloween Day, so 31st of October, and so she always had a couple of Halloween-themed coffee mugs around as well. So. And maybe like a couple of words that she wrote in El Salvador on a mission trip.
Yeah.
I love coffee, and maybe the coffee here is cheap, but the idea that I'm drinking Salvadorian coffee just makes it superb. Eddie made the coffee this morning at church, and something about a cup of morning just starts the day off right. I told him that he made my day. Later on he said that that really made his day. We talked later that day about life, and he said that if that cup of coffee could make my day, then it could do it for people when I make it on Sundays. I know I'll say I'm doing it for God, but I could actually be making somebody's day. And it's not just the coffee, it's the joy I put into making it. And so the more happy I am serving others, the more meaningful it is. So make a damn good cup of coffee. And that's really kind of, one of the things that I didn't say earlier, but one of the things I really, really miss with Rachel is just, when we were, on the weekend or even during the week, is just to make her that first cup of coffee in the morning, because I always did that. So, so that's the one thing. The second thing is, she's really touched a lot of people in our church, and she still does. When she passed away, we started a fund year, or a little thing called the Rachel Fund. Yeah. Fund, the FUN is in capital letters because she was that sort of person, and that's still going. And money that has been deposited into that from people have actually helped to a lot of people to go to LDP. Not LDP, sorry, Jolt, Faith Walkers, yeah. Jolt, and things like that. So she's still touching a lot of lives right here in this church. She's helped people, and that's what she liked doing. She liked helping people. She was very generous with everything. And maybe this is kind of like a good way to kind of really embody a lot of things what Rachel was. One verse, 1 Peter 3, verse 4. You should clothe yourself instead with the beauty that comes from within, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is so precious to God.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's that's pretty much Rachel. I'm sure that you can add a lot of things.
I think our whole church could add a lot of things, and I do think it's helpful to remember great people, great friends. The early church had a way of doing this. They called them saints, and I think Rachel, when I look at her life, she was a saint, and I'm so thankful for her. And thank you, Neal, for sharing. And just as we close, our series right now is called Enduring Hope, and we hope that you guys join on Sundays and listen. But I think, really, as Neal expressed it very well and eloquently, our enduring hope is in Christ, who is seated at the right hand of the Father, and we are excited to be there with him. So thank you, Neal, for sharing about Rachel. Yeah, and we hope that you guys enjoyed this time. And I think that does help us process grief, just talking about friends, talking about people that we love dearly and miss dearly. We pray that this encouraged you, inspired you. Hope you have a great rest of your week.